economic circumstances, but certainly never a bad thing to get some business going, also to maintain and enhance client relationships. And furthermore, during this economic environment with coronavirus and everything like that, never hurts to make sure that we're really rounding out the skill set that we're bringing to the table. So we're here today working together with Lokation to provide webinar Tenant Screening 101, tips, tricks, and best practices. So we're going to go ahead and share some really valuable content today. We have a lot of content to get through, but we're going to move quickly through it. So we'll also take some questions at the end, hopefully if we have time. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So my name is Michael Lucarelli. I'm the co-founder and CEO of RentSpree. And we, as many of you might know, we provide a rental screening and rental application online tool for agents. And we've been working with Lokation for a bit now and really enjoying the relationship. And again, really excited to present this content today. I love educating agents on rental screening practices. So that's a little bit about me. And here's a quick agenda for what we're going to cover today. So first, we'll touch on some key tenant screening points. Next, we're actually going to break down step by step the process for a successful tenant screening process. We'll then touch on a couple high-level screening regulations, just a couple things to keep in mind. And then we'll move on briefly at the end to touch upon how to actually screen. And as I mentioned, if we have any questions, we can try to see if we have time at the end to cover them. So to start off, it's now 2020, where's screening headed? For a lot of the agents out there, there's a couple things to be aware of in terms of changing regulations, whether it's in Florida or other parts of the country. Really important to be aware of the new legislation that's out there revolving around tenant screening, which we will touch upon today. Also, as handling screening, as far as handling screening goes, it can be, as I mentioned, a great way to get kind of business going or to enhance your business. But there are risks inherent to handling that, and so we want to really be careful that we're minimizing those risks as much as possible. And luckily for us, there's new technologies, it seems like on a daily basis, that can help us to more efficiently and effectively handle rentals and rental transactions. So again, we'll touch on some of those things today, but giving a little landscape here. And so with the thousands of agents that we work with, there's some common screening issues that we've seen across the board. And the first of those is breaches when handling sensitive information. So anytime you go in to conduct a rental process or a rental transaction, you want to make sure that you're properly safeguarding the information that you're accessing from rental applicants, and even to the extent that you might have landlord information. But more so when you're handling tenant information, you have a responsibility to make sure that you're handling it properly, storing it properly, sharing it properly, and certainly disposing of that properly when applicable. So that's really important. Secondarily, we're seeing an increased applicant identity fraud. So you want to really make sure that as you might handle rentals, that you're aware of who the person you're screening to, and furthermore, verifying that that person is who they say they are. This is something that becomes more and more inherent, especially when things become more digital, and certainly even more so with the fact that having physical interaction with people might be lessening of late. So really important to make sure that you're taking the proper steps to verify applicant identities. And then finally here, really the risk of discriminatory practices. So most people don't overtly engage in any of these practices. However, just something really to be aware of in terms of fair housing. Rentals tend to be a little bit different than sales transactions in that in some cases you're establishing more of a long-term relationship with prospective tenants versus just a buyer who's going to go through a one-time transaction potentially. So there's just a couple extra points to keep in mind as you go through, and being extra aware and cautious as you're going through and handling rentals. So really there's a couple key tenant screening points that I love to share with those who are, like, again, growing their business, getting started, really all the same in regards to tenant screening. So the first is the availability and accuracy of the information that you might come into contact with. So what information are you going to be able to access as part of your screening process? So employment information, income information is certainly really important, but also looking into resident history, and furthermore, thinking about any sources that are coming or any sources of information that are objective. So things that might come from the credit bureau or a background screening company versus information that's provided directly by the applicant. And so in those cases, when the information is provided by the applicant, you need to take those extra steps to verify those types of information, even more so than you would for something that's coming from an objective source, such as a credit bureau. And so really making sure that you're verifying the information is accurate before you're moving forward and taking that into account for a decision-making process. Because if you're making a decision based on poor information or inaccurate information, the chance is heightened that that decision will be poor itself. So that's really important as you go through screening. The second is cost. So there's really direct costs and indirect costs associated with rentals and rental screening. So first is, if you have to pay for the software that you're using for screening or to handle the transaction, and if there's any screening fees associated with that, if there's a setup fee to start, those are things to keep in mind. However, for many of the agents that work with us and that we worked with over the years, most of them really take into account more so the time that they might spend on the screening process. And while rentals are great to work with, most of the time it turns out that the bottom line tends to be a little bit lower in terms of the income that you might make from a rental transaction compared to a sales transaction. And so any amount of wasted time that you have in the rental process and the screening process really magnifies your bottom line in the end of the day. So making sure that you're running a nice, efficient, and tight process is really important to ensure your success over the long term. Also, again, mentioning like laws and regulations. So making sure that we're following best practices and taking the necessary steps to lower risk as much as possible, because as I mentioned, rentals can end up netting a lower income in the end of the day. You want to make sure that you're not incurring undue risk in doing that. Finally, thinking about convenience as you are handling screening. So being able to set up and start screening right away. Do you have to wait? Do you have to have an on-site inspection done before you can start screening a tenant? All those things are important to take into consideration, especially if you're a little bit newer to screening. And then a second consideration here is what's going to be the turnaround time when you need to get the results back for your screening process. And so if you have to wait a couple days before you can get credit reports back or a background check back, that can really slow down the transaction and slow down your decision, which, the transaction might fall through, or in the best case, it might take you some extra time. And, as we know, time is money. So making sure that we're really optimizing what the turnaround time is and the convenience revolving around the screening practices and the tools that we're using. So breaking down the tenant screening process, we roughly categorize it into three main categories: the before, the during, and the after. And so starting with the first is before. Many of the agents and landlords that we work with typically set their screening criteria first and foremost before they ever start screening a tenant. This is important to make sure that you're establishing an objective set of criteria that you're using in order to evaluate tenants versus subjective criteria, and it helps to reduce the risk of liability. And so many agents out there, they might set benchmarks in terms of credit scores that they're looking for, rent to income ratios, things like that, stipulating the minimum criteria that you're looking for you might move forward with a particular applicant. Secondarily, if you have a rental listing, it's about marketing the property and making sure that you're casting a wide net and getting the highest likelihood to get in some good applicants. And then pre-screening applicants, we'll talk about all these in more detail, but really important to pre-screen to save some of your time and only moving forward with applicants who, at least at the onset, seem like they could be a good fit. And then moving on to during. So showing the property, of course, is important. Collecting rental applications, running screening reports. And then once you've kind of gotten that information back, it's all about verifying applicant information, issuing a decision, and then if things went well, onboarding and potentially signing a lease. So we're going to break these down into a little bit more detail now for you. So first off, we'll touch briefly just on marketing the property. I know that there's a lot of information out there about marketing. The only thing that I will touch upon is that marketing for a rental can be a little bit different, again, from a sales transaction, just because when you work with rentals, you are in most cases establishing, again, a long-term relationship with a prospective tenant versus a sales transaction, which is a one-time thing, and you may, the seller might never see the buyer again in most cases. So you need to be careful that you're creating professional content to really increase the likelihood of attracting a high-quality tenant. From there, it's posting online. So there's a couple, obviously, places that you can post, such as Facebook, Craigslist, the MLS, and more. So being aware of all the options that are out there. We see a lot of agents nowadays are posting on Facebook and finding rental applicants through that channel, but going to be up to you to find out which are the best channels that work best for you in your price point and in your market. Another thing that we see a lot of agents do that saves time for them is to share some of their screening criteria that you've hopefully set prior to this point. Mentioning some of those requirements lets renters know what you're looking for and allows them to actually, in some cases, self-eliminate so that they don't end up having to waste their time and your time. So sharing some of that criteria and advertisements for rentals can help save everyone's time. So after marketing the property, thinking about now a really good pre-screening process is important to run an efficient process. And so pre-screening tenants is all about really just making sure that at the bare minimum, the applicants are aware of like what you're looking for. And so these are a couple questions that we've seen asked frequently that are very telling and can help you, again, to find the right applicants from the get-go before you take further steps down the process, potentially wasting time with someone who just really from the beginning was never going to be a fit. So first, one question is, what would you like to know about the property? And this is a great open-ended question to ask to an applicant, and it gives them an opportunity to really share maybe what's important to them and allows you to see if they're already asking about maintenance issues or asking for things about the property to be changed. Can give you a good indication for how that applicant might behave once they actually lease out the property. Secondarily, I really like to make it painfully obvious the terms of the rental. So these are the major terms of the rentals. Want it to be really clear and upfront. So the monthly rent, the security deposit, the term that you're looking for, the move-in dates. This again helps to make sure that you're on the same page before you really take further steps into the process. So I always make a point to do that when I'm pre-screening. And for example, if you have someone that wants to move in a couple months from now, but you're really looking for someone much, much sooner, then you know that it's not going to make sense to move very much further forward with that particular applicant if the timeframes just don't align. So that's really important. Third here is to make sure, again, that you share the screening criteria when you're going through pre-screening. If you've shared some in the ad, hopefully you can make sure, again, that there's a good fit prior to this point. But again, like asking people, maybe what they think their credit score is at the onset before you move forward and seeing if that meets your criteria can help to save everyone time. And finally, something a little bit out of the box here, but I usually always like to give the applicant some time to just talk. So leaving some silence in the call and giving them a chance for open dialogue can really increase the likelihood that applicants might share some information with you that might be useful to help in your screening process and decision-making process down the road. So once you've pre-screened and you might find someone who's actually a good fit, there's a couple of considerations to just be aware of just in case you might be showing the property, you might be showing a property that's currently occupied by current tenants. So just go ahead and make sure that you're aware at least of what the current tenant's lease is and if there's any terms in there about rules on entry so that you're not potentially violating any terms of the current lease. Also, as courtesy, make sure that you do try to give 24 hours notice prior to showing. Also, scheduling showings during Monday through Friday can also be beneficial for the current tenants, and also avoiding scheduling showings outside of normal business hours. So just a couple of practices here if you are showing a property that's currently occupied by tenants. And like looking more in detail about how, kind of how to show a rental property, there's a couple of schools of thought here. And again, it's really about I would say just creating efficiencies in your process as much as possible. And so again, it's a little bit more critical here for rentals. And so what we see is most commonly people will do individual showings where they'll meet an individual at the property at a specified time. And this is something that can be beneficial because it lets you have one-on-one interaction with prospective tenants and really get to know them well. And also you can give your full attention to them as they might ask questions about the property. But the downside being, of course, that this is tends to be the most inefficient way to go about showings. Just because someone might not show up at the property, and then now you've potentially wasted a couple hours going out to see it, and then you just have to kind of forget the whole thing and cancel it. So it can be a little bit inefficient here. So the next kind of strategy that people use is very common as well. So just having an open house. This is great because it's very efficient. But also has a couple of downsides because it doesn't really let you have maybe the one-on-one interaction that you would with an individual showing. You can't keep as close of an eye on everyone and really get a feel for who might be a good tenant. So there are some downsides to that. And so what we've seen more and more common is that agents will actually schedule what we call block showings. So they'll set aside some time, maybe a 2-hour period, and they'll break it up into 15-minute increments. And they'll actually allow rental prospective tenants to schedule in a particular 15-minute increment so that you can really have the best of both worlds. So being able to have one-on-one time with prospective tenants, but while also like minimizing any potential wasted time, because if someone doesn't show up, the worst case is that you just wait 15 minutes until the next prospective tenant will come for the next slot. So also kind of maximizing your time and reducing the likelihood of really you having to waste time on doing a showing and when no one shows up at all to the property. So once you've gone through your showings and you find that there's a good fit and you have some applicants that are interested, now is when you move to the application collection process. And so really gonna go like kind of high level here about the aspects of the rental application. We do have other content pieces where we'll talk in more detail about reading and interpreting a rental application, but really from a high level, you're gonna expect to receive really this is the first meaningful step that you'll take to start vetting this applicant and getting really the detail that's going to be needed to really make an informed decision about someone that's serious about applying. And so getting the application is typically like their personal information, name, ID number, move-in date, other occupants. You're getting the residence information, so current and previous landlord information, addresses, rent amount, employment and income information, including their like employer contact, like phone numbers and emails. That's all really important. Getting some information about their references, learning about what pets they plan to have or have currently, and then getting some miscellaneous questions like smoking, bankruptcies, etc. And now one thing that we see a lot of our agents do is that some will adopt a no blanks policy. So what that means is that they'll really ensure that the key pieces of information on the application are filled out. Otherwise, they will not really move forward and take that applicant into consideration. And that's important because you really don't want to move forward with an applicant if you're missing key pieces of information such as the contact information or their address for their current residence or even their previous residence, or you have no way to get into contact or verify their employment or their income. Those are really key questions that need to be answered. And if you're not provided with the information to do so, you want to really be extra careful before you move forward with an applicant like that. And then secondarily here, one question that we get a lot is who needs to fill out an application. And so you want to make sure that you're collecting a full and complete rental application that's separate for each occupant who's going to be over the age of 18, who's going to be occupying the unit. And so this is also important because you're going to really everyone has their own separate and distinct information, even if they're a married couple, for example. So you want to make sure that you're collecting separate and distinct sets of information for each individual, regardless of their status or marital status. And so after getting their application information, next it's about getting some of that objective information from third-party sources, which is, again, really important in the decision-making process and allows you to also cross-reference some of that information to the rental application to check and make sure that everyone is providing accurate information there. And so here are a couple of the screening reports typically accessed by agents who are screening or landlords. And so the first is a credit report and score. So getting their payment history, trade lines, collections, inquiries, fraud indicators, and more. This really gives you an indication of whether or not the applicant is going to be financially fit to meet the financial obligations of the rental property. So yeah, that's something that is pretty important to really establish that they can meet those financial requirements, and a credit report is a great way to do that. Next is a background check. So checking their criminal history, also something that's very commonly done. Checking eviction history, so if they have any previous evictions, unlawful detainers, tenant judgments for possession and money, and more. So all good stuff to check out on prospective tenants. And then finally, kind of harkening back to what we mentioned at the beginning, but making sure that you're also verifying the identity of a prospective applicant or a prospective tenant to make sure that that person is who they say they are. For example, you want to, with RentSpree screening, when an applicant inputs their social security number, we actually ask them challenge questions and verify their identity, because if there was someone that was, let's say, they knew they had a poor credit history, so they tried to use their friend's credit score, they would be unable to answer those identity verification questions properly. And so for that reason, they wouldn't be able to submit their screening reports to you, and you would know it. And so this is really important to make sure that you have some kind of identity verification step in place in order to verify that the person who's applying is who they say they are. And so now that you've kind of collected that information back, including the rental application, you've got some screening reports, it's a great practice to make sure that you verify the applicant information that was provided to you by the applicant on the rental application. So generally speaking, there's 5 main categories of information that can be verified. So first is the identity of the applicant, and many people will, if they don't have a verification process in place already, as we discussed, they might also consider getting a government issued ID copy or a copy of a social security card, something like that, to verify the identity and cross-reference the information with the rental application. Second is verifying residence history. And so this is really important to establish that this person has a track record of on-time payments, or they haven't had any issues in the past with previous landlords. And so for residence history, it's even more critical to make sure that not only are you potentially getting into contact with the current landlord, but if possible, making sure that you get into contact with the previous landlord. Why is this important? Because whereas a current landlord might even want to get rid of a poor tenant who's currently living in their unit, so they might not be as likely to give you an accurate picture of the applicant. Whereas if you speak to the applicant's previous landlord, they have no vested interest in the outcome of your rental decision. So therefore, they might be more likely to give you an accurate picture or portrayal of the applicant in question. So just something to keep in mind there. Next is employment. So verifying that they're currently employed, that they have steady employment. That's important. That it's not something that they've been jumping around jobs or that they're in danger of losing their current job. Especially in this day and age, really important to verify that. Kind of in line with employment is also verifying their income. So is their income accurate based on what was listed on the rental application? So being able to verify that can also be accomplished through contacting their current employer. But also many agents out there will also collect proof of income through the form of pay stubs, W-2s, tax returns are generally good if someone is self-employed, and then also bank statements is if someone is relying on their funds in order to cover the rent. So those are all documents that are commonly used to verify income. And finally, here are references. So a little bit less common to verify, but nonetheless something, if you've got references on the rental application, you can go ahead and check those out too. Moving along here. So after you've really collected all the information, got everything verified, so you know that you're actually using as accurate information as possible to make a decision. Now it's about issuing that decision. So accepting an applicant, pretty straightforward, moving forward to sign the lease. The last two, however, are a little bit special. So if you're going to accept someone on condition, That means that you're going to place additional stipulations on the lease. Maybe someone doesn't quite meet one of your criteria that you have set up in place. So maybe their income is fine, but their credit score is a little bit low. You might want to require a cosigner or add an additional security deposit or increase the rent amount. These are what you would call accept on condition. So you're accepting the applicant, but you're adding additional conditions on top of your acceptance. And then the third option here is to reject the applicant, so denying the applicant, also pretty straightforward. And so if you do accept on condition or reject, it's good to think about whether or not you're going to need to issue an adverse action notice under those circumstances. So something to keep in mind as well if you're going to move forward to accept or reject, or accept on condition, excuse me, or reject the applicant. So after you've issued the decision, hopefully things have went well, you found a good applicant, and you can move forward to the lease signing process. And we're not going to go into the detail of the lease signing process here, but that'll be maybe something for another day, but hopefully things went well and you moved on to the lease signing process. And I'll pause here if there's any questions.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much. We do have some people watching on our closed Facebook group as well, so I'll let you know if any questions come in through there. But for the moment, looks like we're good.
Great. And how are we doing on time here?
You're good. Do you still have some to go?
I've got a couple more slides. We can just get things finished up.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. All right. Thanks. And so moving along here, we're going to just briefly touch upon some screening regulations. And one thing that I'll say is that we're not attorneys and we don't provide any legal advice or anything that can be construed as that. So as you go through and conduct a screening process, we highly recommend that you always make sure that you're engaging with an experienced or licensed landlord-tenant attorney. But that being said, just going to touch briefly upon a couple items here. So first is running background checks. So when you use background checks as part of a screening process, there's some special considerations to take into account that you're handling those the right way. We're also going to touch briefly on protected classes and the FCRA today before we finish up. So thanks guys for sticking with us, and we'll get on with the last section here. So touching upon background checks, again, something where you want to make sure that you're really taking special consideration if you do choose to use background checks as part of your screening process. And again, something that, really recommend to consult with an attorney if you decide to do that. So the first is to make sure that you have permissible purpose for using background checks. So using reports for an approved reason. This should go without saying, and a permissible purpose would be using it for a housing decision. So usually if you're using it within a screening context, you should be okay. But just want to be careful that using background checks is something that can be sensitive. You want to make sure that you're collecting the proper authorization from applicants prior to the time when you run a background check on an applicant. Also thinking about how you use those background checks in your decision-making process. Many agents and landlords, they avoid automatically denying an applicant just because they have any criminal record at all. So just for a simplified example, you might want to think twice before you deny someone just because they might have had a traffic ticket for a stop sign or something like that. So really taking more of a critical look into what the actual criminal records are that they come back, if any, before just having blanket denials for anyone that has any criminal record at all. As I mentioned, making sure that you seek counsel if you use these types of reports, and then making sure that you're properly handling, storing, and disposing of all reports throughout the process. Moving on here. So now we're just going to give a brief overview for the federally protected classes that are out there, and these do vary state by state. So there could be federally protected classes that differ from state to state, but generally speaking, federally protected classes are included in race, religion, those with physical disability, those of color, certain color, mental disability, sex, familial status, and national origin. So what this means is that you don't want to treat people differently on the basis of these certain classifications. So again, most people won't overtly engage in any of these types of discriminatory practices. However, just a couple like quick things to keep in mind. So these are some of the common ways that people might potentially engage in some discriminatory practices on the basis of a protected class. So potentially refusing to rent to someone, even like discouraging someone from applying on the basis of a protected class, using different terms and conditions for someone of a protected class. And as a good example for this one too, this is one where you want to make sure a lot of people, they like to, maybe when they're charging a screening fee to a couple or a married couple, they might, instead of, maybe they normally charge $50 per person for their screening fee. And then if it's a married couple, they might charge $75 for two. So essentially providing a $25 discount to a married couple who might apply to a property. This seems like a nice thing to do. However, you want to be careful before doing certain things like that, just because now you could potentially be treating a group differently just because they're married, and you're actually giving them maybe a potential advantage versus those that aren't married and are single and have to pay the regular screening fee the same as everyone else. So just things about that you might just want to think about and be careful. Excluding those from advertisements, lying about availability, ads that indicate preference, steering to particular units, and potentially using a different screening process. So maybe running certain reports on applicants that you might not have run on others on the basis of these protected classes. So these are just a couple important considerations to keep in the back of your mind as you go through and are handling a screening process. And so to really sum things up here, RentSpree provides a really straightforward yet detailed tool that can handle pretty much all the aspects of the rental screening process for you. And so RentSpree collects an online rental application that's always completed, always filled out to completion by the applicant. At the same time, we also provide instant access to credit reports, background checks, eviction reports, and we also verify the identity of every applicant who applies. And so RentSpree is also nice because it doesn't cost you anything. Applicants pay a $30 screening fee to apply. So you can start using RentSpree within a couple minutes, get all the information that you might need for a decision, and applicants pay the screening fee on RentSpree when they apply, which is also nice because then you don't have to pay out of pocket. You don't have to chase the applicant for any money. You don't have to wait for that. So again, talking about really the theme, one of the themes today, which is streamlining things. This can really help with that. And so you can claim your free RentSpree account with your email address on RentSpree. And from there, it's just a matter of inviting applicants to apply, which you can do so using an applicant's email address or a phone number. And applicants from there can go online, fill everything out for you. And once they submit everything back and verify their identity, you can get a rental application, credit report, background check, and 50-state eviction history back through RentSpree. So kind of like a one-stop shop, getting everything in one shot, streamlining things as much as possible. And so I'll direct you guys to location.rentspree.com. If you'd like to learn more about what RentSpree offers, give us a call there. Our number's on there. You can email us. And certainly you can claim your account and start screening your first tenant in about 2 minutes. So I want to thank everyone for the time on the webinar today. And yeah, I'm not sure if there are any questions, but if there's any questions, we can go ahead and maybe address some of those now.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, that was pretty all-encompassing. Kind of seemed to cover everything. I don't even know if anybody would have any questions anyway. So thank you so much. Lots of great information. I did just want to emphasize the ease of use of the RentSpree system and how you guys have kind of streamlined the process, and which was one of the main reasons that we decided to partner with RentSpree. Another place you can access RentSpree is on our online office at locationre.com. So you can go to the sphere and click the resources tab and just scroll down towards the bottom, and you'll see the link to RentSpree. So either you can go to the link as you see on the screen, or it's within the sphere, so you can access it that way as well. So if anybody does have any questions, feel free to speak up. I'm also looking at the Facebook group. Doesn't look like we have anything there. But yeah, thank you so much, Michael.
Great.
If
Thank
anybody
you
has any
guys.
questions, they have a great support team there as well, or you can always email our support team at locationre.com, and we'd be happy to get you in touch with the right people or answer the questions if we're able to. So thank you so much, Michael, and the others on this call. We really appreciate you guys. And yeah.
Likewise. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.
All right. Thanks, Michael. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.